All right, Dr. J, welcome to the Unfiltered Healing Podcast. We're so excited to have you on today. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good, Rachel. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, we're excited to talk today about what is called methylation. And so, before we get into that topic of methylation today, why don't you give the audience just a little brief synopsis, so to speak, of what kind of got you into the healing field? As far as I know, that you have extensive background in the field of genetics, in the field of epigenetics, which we'll be talking about a lot today. What made you, as a practitioner, look at this type or this section of healing? A lot of it's kind of our own personal journeys. So, what kind of led you into that part of looking into this, and what has it kind of opened up for you as far as your role as a practitioner?
Good question. Yeah, I think, it seems like everybody I talk to who's a practitioner has gotten there because of their own personal journey with healing. And for sure, I did too. I didn't, I hadn't really been exposed to natural medicine. I was raised in the allopathic sort of model. And I got real sick. I was a sick puppy in my 20s. I was a single mom and um, working too much and stressing and eating badly. And I started to get pretty sick. I think, probably some chronic fatigue syndrome at that time and massive migraine headaches and nausea and fatigue. And I was looking for answers. I went back to the medical doctors and they did tests, like so many people who talk about their stories. They did all these medical tests and said, that we can't find anything. Here's a prescription for headaches. And it was like, wait, you're covering up a symptom. And it just I never vibed with it. I didn't go a lot as a kid to the doctor. I was always one of those, no, it'll go away kind of people. But when I actually did need help, there were no answers in that realm. And so I started looking at natural medicine. And I started reading. I was working in a bookstore and I was reading every book I could get my hands on that had to do with diet and natural health and remedies, etc. I'd take the book home at night and I'd read it and then I'd take it back in the morning and put it back on the shelf. So it was confusing though. After a while, I'm like, well, I just read a book that said raw vegetables are the way to go. And then I just read another one that said, no, never do raw vegetables. And one that said you should be a vegetarian. And another one that says, no, never be a vegetarian. And it's like, how do you know? It was so confusing to me. And so, well, I thought everybody sort of agreed on, you should eat fresh raw foods and vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds and that kind of thing. And I started doing that and I actually felt worse. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening here? Why do I feel worse? Everybody says that'll make you healthy. And I went to a health food store and I started talking to a woman there and telling her my symptoms. And I was looking at all the different brands on the shelf. There's 20 brands of vitamin C. There's, like how if you don't know anything about natural supplements, you look at that and you're like, oh my gosh, how do you start? What do I take? So I was talking to her and she said, well, have you ever tried chiropractic? And I was like, chiropractic? What does that have to do with headaches and nausea and fatigue? And she said, well, you'd be surprised what chiropractors can do. And I thought, okay, I'm open. And so I went to a chiropractor, got adjusted, and it made no difference at all. It didn't really help. So I was like, okay, cross that off the list. And then my roommate said, I go to this other chiropractor who does some really interesting things. He does something called kinesiology. Have you ever heard of that? And I was like, never heard of it. They said, go check him out. And so I did. And, he's got my arm up in the air and he's pushing on it. And I was like, yeah, this is weird. And, but within 10 minutes, he told me exactly why I was sick and what to do about it. How to change my diet, what supplements to take, and they adjusted me. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to follow his stuff. It's weird, but I'm just going to do what he said. And I did. And within a week, I felt like a whole new human being. I was like, that was weird, but it worked. So I just kept going back. And then I thought, I want to do this. This is really exciting. And I started looking at different, classes. I took Touch for Health, and I took a bunch of different kinesiology classes, and behavioral kinesiology, educational kinesiology. And then I found something called Kinesionics, which was a 6-month course that really would train me to be a practitioner. And so I became a practitioner, and that was well before chiropractic school. So I was actually a kinesiologist first. And I started working on people, and it was stunning. People were getting well left and right, even though I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just using the
Right.
kinesiology. And I got the bug. It was one of those things where people come back and they go, "Oh my God, I feel amazing," and you go, "I want to do this. I want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to help people." So and it helped me. So once you have experienced something that helps you, it really kind of brings it home and makes you passionate about what you do. So
Mm-hmm.
I just started practicing, and then I thought, well, I want to know more. I want to go learn it all. So I went to chiropractic school and got my degree and started using that. And we were talking earlier about the different modalities. So now I had some understanding of nutrition and diet and that kind of thing. And then now I have, as a chiropractor, we do musculoskeletal support. And then I also went back and studied some emotional support techniques, like emotional freedom techniques, so that I could have a well-rounded approach to healing my patients. So that's how I started.
Yeah. So key to have all of those facets. Yeah. And so through that journey of now you're in practice and you're treating people, and we'll talk about a little bit about kinesiology later because that's such a key component to this work as well. What made you start looking into genetics, and what kind of sparked that as far as within your practice?
Yeah, again, good question. Um, so I've been practicing for about 30 years, and well, at that time it was about 25 years when I really started looking at the genetics. But there were things I was really good, very successful, had a lot of good successes. But as you know, it's the people that we can't help that we really think about, and we take home with us, and we go, what did I
Mhm.
miss? What's missing here? And I had some people that just didn't respond to anything I did, and I kept thinking there's something we're missing. I have all of these different modalities at my fingertips, and they're great, but then there's just something, with these patients. Why can't I get them well? And so the other thing is, I was looking at my own personal journeys. Like, I suffered from depression my entire life, and I
Mm.
didn't talk about it a lot. We as practitioners, we don't talk about like our own issues, but I kept wondering what's going to fix me. I would try all kinds of things. I had all kinds of tools at my fingertips, like nutrition and diet and supplements, and but nothing ever worked for me. Even the emotional work didn't work. I just couldn't get to the core of it, and so I started to wonder if it wasn't maybe genetic. And then the chronic fatigue syndrome, still I couldn't get on top of, after all the tools I have in my bag, all the things I know. And I thought, well, there's not, again, something missing. And then here's an experiment that was really instructive. It was my my father died at age 55 of lung cancer, and he did everything he could to
Mm.
get lung cancer, and it worked. But the thing that was interesting was, so here's my dad. He's smoking and drinking and just stressing himself out, not eating right. Uh, really had no health practices or health awareness. And my stepfather, who ended up marrying my mother after he died, did the same thing, but he lived another 30 years doing the same things, smoking and drinking and stressing and not
Mm.
eating healthy. And I was like, the only thing that can explain that is genetics, So I started to look into that, and I kept hearing that word, methylation, that you mentioned earlier, and I was like, well, what what is methylation? I don't even know what that is, but I'm hearing it a lot. So I started Googling it and studying everything I could get my hands on that had to do with methylation. And I came across this video by a guy named Rich von Konynenberg, and it was on chronic fatigue syndrome, and he was using genetics. Amy Yasko was the other person who was using genetics to really heal those chronic diseases. And I was like, well, maybe there's an answer there. And so just really started jumping into looking at how do our genetics really affect our health? What is methylation? How can we apply that in the clinical setting? And what do we do with that? What do we do with, okay, here you have a gene and it can lead to certain diseases. How do we work with it? And so I
Mm.
did a deep dive into it, and it was fascinating what I found.
Yeah, yeah, it's a key to, like, so many different things, but so many are don't know what it is or not aware of it, and you find that when you're even working with people in your clinic or, you're a person and you've done certain things, but it worked for someone else, but it wasn't working for you, and I think methylation is a key part in that because of, what we are each uniquely designed with. That's why there's no one size fits all. And
Yeah.
how does that influence, the care that we actually have success with? And that's what makes it so impactful. So let's kind of dig into what methylation really is. So we talked, a little bit about genetics. So what is methylation for those that don't know what it is? And how does that influence, our genetics? How does that influence our health?
Well, it's interesting. It's a lot more than methylation. Really, once I understood methylation, and I'll talk about what it is in a second, but I realized it's a pathway in the body that governs certain biochemical processes. Um, but it was much bigger than methylation. It was methylation and its supporting pathways. So methylation is just one pathway
Mhm.
in the body. It's how we take folic acid and turn it into methyl. I'm sorry. So the MTHF. Let me start over. There's a genetic variant called the MTHFR, and that's the mother flipper, we call it, because it's really the
Yes.
most studied genetic variant. That what it does is turn folic acid into methylfolate, or the active form of folic acid, and it and methyl B12 help the body create methyl groups. Those methyl groups can travel around the body and do certain things. One thing they do is they turn off the expression of certain genes that could cause cancer or heart disease or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But they also upregulate certain biochemical reactions in the body. Some that produce neurotransmitters such as serotonin and dopamine. So has a lot to do with how your brain functions and how your mood is regulated, basically. But it's governed by genetics. So if you have certain genetic variants that inhibit your body from making methyl groups correctly, then number one, your DNA is not protected. It can't protect itself from the environment, and it'll cause your
Mhm.
genes to be triggered by the environment and by environmental exposures. So
Mhm.
that's a big deal. It's how we repair our RNA and our DNA in our bodies. Without methylation, those things repair, and so those can lead to chronic diseases and cancers and etc. Um, but again, it upregulates certain biochemical reactions like breaking down histamine, so it can affect your response ability, basically your production of histamine and your ability to break it down. So it can cause people to have severe allergic responses, for anything from moderate to severe allergic responses. It can affect your brain chemistry. Your ability to detox is largely governed by how well you make
Mhm.
methyl groups. And so
Mhm.
it can affect a lot of other body processes. But again, it's much
Mhm.
more than methylation. When we looked at methylation itself and we started giving people the active forms of folic acid and B12, like methylfolate and methyl B12, it starts up a lot of processes. The body starts dumping toxins, and the neurotransmitters come online, and the people's memory was like boom, their word recall came back, and their allergies were better. But then what we realized was that very shortly things started to back up. Like it started making people sick.
Mhm.
At first, they
Mhm.
were like, for the first week or two, they're like, "Oh my god, this is amazing." And then it was too much detox or too much neurotransmitters or too much breakdown of biochemical processes. So we had to learn the related pathways, and that's, I think, you took some of our classes, and
Mhm.
learned how those
Mhm.
pathways interrelate with each other. So we don't just look at methylation, we look at, your ATP production, your Krebs cycle, energy production at the cellular level, or mitochondrial function.
Yeah.
Um, basically, how well do we turn food into energy? And that can be also governed by genetics. Methylation plays a part in that, but we have to look at other genes as well, not just those genes that govern methylation, but those genes that are affected by methylation. So what we realized was you can't just turn on methylation and expect it all to go well. You have to make sure the body's going to do the right thing with those methyl groups, and that was big. That was a big discovery. So for me, when I got my genes tested, I found out I had a genetic variant called the vitamin D receptor variant. In other words, I don't make the receptor for vitamin D, so the body can't absorb vitamin D. And I always wondered why my D levels were so low. Whenever I get my blood work done, my vitamin D levels were low, and I could take all the vitamin D in the world and it wouldn't budge them. And it wouldn't
Mm.
test for me when I do kinesiological testing or muscle testing. It wouldn't test well for me. I'm like, I don't understand
Mhm.
this. My body's saying I have low vitamin D, but I can't get it in there. And once I discovered I have that genetic variant, I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And then I started researching it. I started looking at, there's a couple of websites like Snippedia,
Mhm.
SNEDIA, and it's where all the studies are done on a specific genetic variants. And I looked into that one, and I found that one of the things it does is cause cancer when you smoke. And I went,
Mm.
ah, that's what happened to my dad, and probably my stepdad did not have that gene. So
Right.
you probably know people who get away with smoking or drinking or behaving badly and no repercussions, and other people that are like affected by everything. So anyway, so that was one clue that I was on the right track. The second clue was it affects your brain chemistry, your ability to make serotonin and dopamine has a very real effect on that. And I went,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, that's probably why I've been depressed my entire life. And then the third thing that I started to know about that genetic variant was that it can lead to immune dysregulation, where you're not able to get on top of infections. And this is every time I got my blood work done, Epstein-Barr virus was there, and it was leading to chronic fatigue syndrome. So I went, wow, this just fits, and it makes so much sense to me. So, but then how do we work with that? What do we do with that? We know how to get past the MTHFR gene and give somebody methylfolate, but what do we do about the vitamin D receptor? And so I started looking into it and
Mhm.
studying and just Googling and looking for the answers, and found them in what are called cofactors. So vitamins and minerals can upregulate our genes. And so I found the cofactors for the vitamin D receptor, which makes it work correctly. And they're nutrients, they're basic nutrients. So it's vitamins and specific vitamins and minerals. And when I started taking the right one for that particular gene, bam, my brain chemistry came on. And
Mhm.
I was like, I think this is happiness. I've heard about it, but I was happy
Yeah.
for the first time in my life. And it was stunning to me. I was like, oh my gosh, all this time I've been trying to be happy, working on it, just it was always there, though my depression was always there. And now my set point is here. I'm just happy. I have my moods for sure, but my set point is here, not down here all the time where I'm just struggling to get my mood up. And my chronic fatigue syndrome, gone within 2 weeks after 50 years of dealing with it, gone. And I was like, oh man, I'm on to something here. And when it works for you, it's like, yeah, something's going on here.
Yeah.
So I started working. I started getting my patients tested. I got their genes tested, and then started looking at what does this genetic variant do? What does it mean? How do we work with it? What are the right nutrients to give that person? And when we started targeting those
Mhm.
genes, my chronic people that I was talking about, bam, they were getting well. And I was seeing like
Mhm.
really chronic stuff like Lyme disease, leaky gut, uh,
Mhm.
Parkinson's. I saw Hashimoto's improve and actually disappear on all the patients I had that had Hashimoto's, which is like an autoimmune disorder of the thyroid that affects the thyroid,
Mm-hmm.
MS, an MS patient that got out of his wheelchair, and I was like, this, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this is it. This is really it for those chronic patients. For me personally, which was fantastic, but also for all those people I couldn't help, that I initially couldn't help. So I got pretty excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's powerful. I can attest, my own personal success with it as well, recovering from immune system dysfunction and so many people coming in and just like bucket loads of supplements. I know when I had my first journey, bucket loads of
Uh-huh.
supplements where we're not even absorbing them because of these difference in our biochemistry. And it is so important, going back to the basics of what we each uniquely need. Doesn't matter how many things you do, you have to figure out uniquely what each person needs and how to foundationally have the biochemistry to even begin to work on emotional stuff. You know what I mean? It just doesn't stick or it doesn't stay because you don't make that biochemical change. And
Right,
so I want to,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So I want to go back to you were talking about when you first dived into methylation, and you would give a supplement, people would feel great, and then they wouldn't feel great. And I think that's very common when people go on these supplement protocols or they start doing nutrition, and then they get kind of on this yo-yo. They get frustrated. Um,
Yeah.
And I know when I started taking your courses and learning about this, it started really changing my mind about nutrients and things of that nature as good or bad. We have this thing that, oh, herbs are really good, or plants are really good, or these are really good. And unfortunately, some of these things people do not process very well, myself included. And so, that's also really important for people to know, that knowing these key kind of definitions of your own biochemistry customizes that for you. And so I want to go back to, that holistic approach that you talked about. It's not just one gene. And when we started learning about genes, that's what we would do. Oh, MTHFR, let's just give methylfolate. um,
Yeah.
but how, with your process of kind of figuring that out, how did you begin to figure out the order that you teach? So I know when you teach about methylation, you teach about a specific order of how the body works and how it processes, and that's really key to utilizing the genetic information that you get. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, because it's so interesting because we paid attention to the side effects. It was a big deal
Mhm.
when we first started using methylation, and we thought, well, methylfolate's the answer, give it to everybody. And
Yeah.
I started to see all these side effects, and I'm like, why is that happening? What's going on there? The kinesiology allows you to sort of see into the body, but we're using objective testing as well. Like my
Mhm.
first patient, um, he started to get these ticks, and I was like, oh, that's not good. What's going on there? And when I tested him, it came up heavy metals. He was dumping all these heavy metals, and it was causing some neurological.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
uh, but that's kinesiology, and or muscle testing. And I was like, well, I want to see for sure what's going on. And so we did the urine test on him, and out was coming mercury and lead and aluminum, and all the heavy metals were just dumping without any provocation. So
Yeah.
we collected the urine for 6 hours with no chelators, nothing to try to increase what was coming out in the urine, but it was coming out. So we knew that turning on methylation causes the body to dump those things. So you have to make sure that
Mhm.
you're ready. So we thought, well, okay, we just need to support the liver. We need to support the colon. We need to support kidneys and detox. So we did that for a little bit, but it
Mhm.
was like, gosh, people were not happy. At first they were happy, and then they were
Mhm.
like, this feels terrible. I'm not going to do this for very long. I couldn't do it for very long. I felt terrible. I had massive headaches. I'm like, I can't do this. And I thought, but I know
Mhm.
the answer is there. And then once I turned on like my VDR and did methylation, that was better. But then a different side effect would happen, like anxiety. Like I turned on too much of the neurotransmitters and they couldn't break down. So we knew we were running into another gene there. And so
Mhm.
when we upregulated that gene, we knew that okay, we can turn on methylation and we can turn on the VDR and upregulate our brain chemistry safely. So I started playing with that idea, like what happens when we turn this gene on? What happens downstream? And that was where the key was. So we have to make sure that we're ready. You know, when you turn on methylation, lots of things are going to happen in the body. When you turn
Yeah.
on that vitamin D receptor, it affects about 800 other genes. And that was the thing that was missing in so many people's understanding of working with genetics was you're affecting other things. So you got to make sure that you're ready because otherwise you're going to create another problem downstream. So we just kept working
Yes.
downstream. And we came up, you know, with that pathway that looks at these different interrelated biochemical pathways in the body and how they connect together. And finally found that a system that said you got to start here first. Start here. We call it the order of clearing. You got to start.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is mitochondrial function. You got to start there.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you know, when you turn things on, actually what we saw with that was they're going to be tired and they're going to gain weight.
Mm-hmm.
And so we realized that, okay, we really do have to start at mitochondrial function, which is deep down in the cell. The mitochondria is how we produce energy.
Yeah.
And when we started doing that, we realized that we actually were turning on a lot of these genes that we had been working with previously. They started to work better. Like each, let me back up with a description here. So if you have a genetic variant, that means that you know you get one gene from mom, one gene from dad, and it's a code. That
Mm-hmm.
code it tells your body to make a certain enzyme, let's say, or a
Mm-hmm.
receptor. Um, that enzyme, if you've got the wrong code, if you've got what we call a genetic variant uh, in the actual code that your parents gave you, it's not a mistake; it's a variation.
Mm-hmm.
One one parent gave you the wrong code, the other gave you the right code. That's what we call heterozygous variant.
Mm-hmm.
Both parents, if they gave you the wrong code for that enzyme, that's a homozygous variant, and it can reduce the function of that enzyme by about 70%. So imagine having a 70% reduction in an enzyme that makes energy out of your food. That would suck
Yeah.
because you're going to gain weight easily and you're going to be low in energy, and that's a fairly common thing. But that ATP that's produced, that's the basic unit of energy in the body.
Mm-hmm.
It's required by all the other enzymes in the body. They need ATP to function too. So
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have ATP, all the enzymes in the body are going to functioning at a low level. They're going to function at a low level.
Yep.
So when we found that when we upregulated the ATP production down in the mitochondria, a lot of the other enzymes were doing this. They were like, boom, they're firing up. And we didn't need to supplement them as much. So it's if you start there at that foundation, your supplement program is going to be a lot smaller. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
be targeted on the main genetic variants that you have inherited. So for me, it's the vitamin D receptor. Definitely, I have some issues down in the mitochondria, but those, you know, those are again not mistakes. They're like how
Yeah.
your ancestors survived. You know, if you could stay alive during times of starvation, then you passed on your genes, but it
Mm-hmm.
also passed on the genes that cause you to gain weight during times of, you know, when calories are plentiful,
Yes.
and and to slow down your metabolism so that you can survive. But that's not very fun. It's not a very fun genetic variant to have. And so we found that people were pretty happy when we started firing up their ATP production. They got more energy and they started losing weight. But also all the other enzymes just started working better. You know, they were digesting better, their thinking better, their histamine was low, you know, was breaking down better, their detoxing better, everything worked better. So that was, we found that was number one. We have to start there. And then we move up the chain to what we have found to be the next important area to address. And then finally, methylation is the last thing that we actually
Mm-hmm.
address because it's so powerful. When we
Yes.
turn it on, we better be ready. We want everything downstream to be like powered up and ready to go when we do turn on that methylation because it's big. It's a big deal. So I think that's really the difference between, you know, a lot of people that are working with genetics and our system is we teach you how to work with those pathways in the correct order of clearing so that your patients have amazing results.
Yeah,
and no side
that's the
effects.
that's a huge takeaway for people to know is, like, if you go get your genetics run, which we'll talk about later, uh, and you have, this long list of all these variants, then oftentimes people will just kind of cherry pick. And practitioners, we used to do this too before we knew, right? You cherry
Yeah,
pick these kind of, oh, I have, this genetic variant, I'm going to give these supplements. And don't miss what Dr. J is saying here is that there is a very specific order of how your body works and how it processes certain things. And so
yeah,
because, things haven't worked, you have to kind of go back to how things really are made and broken down and how things process. And she's kind of, in a way, learned how that process works. And one of those first processes is energy production. And so,
mhm,
as we talk about energy production and ATP, what are kind of, because we know that's just like foundationally, almost every single person has issues with ATP and causes these genes to really express themselves further. So,
right.
can you touch a little bit on um, what causes some of that ATP energy mitochondrial dysfunction to begin, since that's the foundational beginning of most all of these protocols and has so many different facets? What causes the mitochondrial ATP to be dysfunctional? And then what can we do about that?
Yeah, it's a really important question because you're right. The majority of people do have mitochondrial dysfunction, and it leads to chronic disease. I read a book
Mhm.
recently called "Tripping Over the Truth." It was a really good book on mitochondrial function and cancer. There's a real huge connection there. And the
Mhm.
mitochondria. The thing about
Mhm.
mitochondria is they have their own DNA. It's different from yours, and it can't methylate. They can't turn off their DNA and keep the environment from affecting it. So it's highly susceptible to environmental damage, and that's from electromagnetic fields, that's from chemicals, pesticides, antibiotics is a big one.
Mhm.
Because it's mitochondrial DNA, or mitochondria is actually of bacterial origin. Many millions of years ago, it implanted itself into our cells, but it was a bacteria. It used to live outside our cells, but it became a symbiotic sort of relationship where these bacteria, good bacteria, live within our cells and produce energy out of our food, which allowed our,
Mhm.
evolution. But anyway, they're highly delicate and damaged easily by the environment. So this is a compelling reason for people to avoid electromagnetic fields and to heavy
Yeah.
metals and uh, a lot of the drugs that are on the market today, and especially antibiotics, can in some cases, they say, permanently damage the mitochondria. And so it's no wonder people are
Mhm.
tired and gaining weight. It's very, very common. How many people do you
Mhm.
know that are not exposed to pesticides, chemicals, electromagnetic fields, heavy metals? Like nobody, right? So
No one.
you add to that a genetic variant that also slows down mitochondrial function, or interferes with it functioning correctly, and that's a nasty combo. So it isn't like, oh, just work
Right.
with your genetics and eat anything you want, be exposed to anything you want, don't exercise. It's just not true, because that delicate mitochondria really is very delicate, and needs protection from us. We need to watch the pesticides. We need to watch, eating organic and eating fresh foods, and getting exercise that replenishes mitochondria. So it's not like, we can ignore those common sense things that you and I have been talking to people about for years, which is like, eat clean. It matters.
Toxic.
So
Yeah.
so there's that, and then there's some specific genetic variants down there that are really interesting. There's some very uh, interesting little genetic variants that lead right into what's called the electron transport chain, where ATP is actually produced. You can have a block
Mhm.
there, a genetic block. Um, and they require certain nutrients. Again, when we give them the exact right nutrients for their body, bam, it fires up the ATP, and people go, woo, yeah, I can feel that at the
Mhm.
cellular level. You're putting fuel in your tank. and
Yes.
it's amazing. It's a wonderful experience of energy and mitochondrial function. You feel it.
Yes.
So the
Yes, you
thing
do.
that the thing that I tell people, this is like the elevator speech that I give people because they're like, "What do you do?" And if I say the word methylation, they go, "Oh, that's nice. Look at the time." But I'll say, what we do is we get your genes tested, and we design a nutritional program around your genes, and it's diet, it's lifestyle, it's supplementation, and they go, "Well, how do I get that done?" Because they know,
Mhm.
it's like, okay, I've tried everything, and they're hearing more about how genetics can affect their physiology and cause depression, fatigue, weight gain, sensitivities, toxic issues, allergies, all of it can directly be linked to certain genetic variants. So it's very cool when you get your report back and you go, "Oh my gosh, this explains so much." And it did for me. It was like, "Wow, look at that."
Mhm.
The vitamin D receptor for me was just an epiphany. It's like, "Wow, it wasn't my fault that I was depressed." And I had been beating myself up, and I think that's pretty common that we do that. We think
Yeah.
it's maybe I'm just not thinking positive enough, or I don't eat clean enough, or we just
Yes.
same thing with
Mhm.
weight. When you give people the right nutrients, they stop craving bad foods and they start eating right. So it's like it's a paradigm shift because for years I would talk to people about just eat right. Stop eating the sugar. Is that
Mhm.
light really bright in
Yeah, I don't know what's going on at all.
here? I was talking to them about just stop eating the sugar, stop eating all the fat, stop eating fast food, and they're like, yeah, okay. And then they wouldn't because their brain was
Mhm.
craving those things. And if you give the body the right
Yeah.
stuff, it turns off their cravings and they start eating the right things. So we had it backwards. We really did. Because the brain is really powerful, especially when it's craving something. It's like, oh, I gotta have it. I know I'm
Yeah.
not supposed to, but my brain is not going to shut up until I get it. So we found that to be a very interesting shift in our thinking. Like, wow, look at that. People change their behaviors when you change their biochemistry. And so that was a
Yeah.
big deal.
I can attest to that too. When my biochemistry is off, we'll crave certain things.
Yeah, it's a signal. It's a symptom, that okay,
Yeah.
I'm off track. There's something nutritionally off track because I'm craving crappy stuff.
Yeah, your body's always trying to send you signals, right?
Yeah, it's telling
And
you something.
and that's what I tell people too, when we look at these genetic variants is like you said, it's not like a get out of jail free, you can't necessarily not do good things as well. But it's a key for us to know what someone's maybe weaknesses are. And the more toxins are in our environment, the more radiation we're exposed to, the more stress and all of these things that you add on, the more limitations that person can have. And I think that's, really the key of knowing this information is that most people will just go into, oh, I'm going to just go do a detox program, or I'm going to do this to change a pattern, or I'm going to do this. And it's like, this is so helpful because it begins to take the guesswork out. And it
Yeah,
begins to say, okay, these are really, the unique things that you need, and these are why. And then it makes, those big shifts of customization. So
yeah,
let's talk a little bit about, once someone gets their genetics run, which we can talk about which program to use for that. Um, let's talk a little bit about how, the foundation of the protocols that you teach on for practitioners and that I've utilized in my practice and many other doctors are using is
yeah.
also utilizing the kinesiology testing with that. And that helps us kind of customize those programs like you were talking about. And I think that's also really vital when you're looking at this work. So can you touch a little bit about um, why that was so different, because I know that you've had a lot of training from, like, really top biochemists in the genetic field too, and how then you adapted and created, because I know you're very, esteemed in the world of kinesiology testing, and how that, changed what you were doing as far as, your programs and customization, and why that's also really vital. Because I know people think like we thought when we first got kinesiology testing, like, "This stuff is weird."
Yeah,
It's
right.
actually science-based, and,
Yeah,
our body is electric and all of this stuff just works together. So can you
yeah.
kinda touch on that about how that really just makes this so key of customization working so well?
Yeah, I've been muscle testing for 32 years now. 30, yeah, 32 years. And it's an incredible tool. I really trust it. I've learned to trust it over the years. At first, I was like, yeah, I don't know.
Right?
It's a little weird. And, my some patients are like, yeah, no, huh? But
Mhm.
others that just at least suspend your judgment and give it a try. It's
Yes.
stunning. It's always led me to learn more and give me more knowledge about the body. And the
Mhm.
cool thing was when I started to apply it to biochemical pathways, oh my gosh, I learned so much about the body. I'm not, I never liked chemistry. Never, I actually failed it twice when I was in college. So, and then, and I didn't really like it in chiropractic school. We had a very dry teacher and it was a terrible subject.
Yeah, we did too. Yeah.
You too. But then when I started to see how I could apply it to my patient using kinesiology, oh my God, I just got obsessed. It's like, oh my gosh, I
Mhm.
can tell if the body is making energy out of its food by testing it
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
finding where the breakdown is actually happening, where along that pathway from eating a food to breaking it down into individual nutrients and then making different substrates out of it until it becomes ATP. Where's the breakdown? And you can do that with kinesiology, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like seeing directly into the body, and that's just using the kinesiology. And I know, not everybody's open to that or understands it or vibes with it. But I love it. I just really love it because it's taught me so much about the body. And then when I talk to people, they were like, well, I don't know. Where's the science? It's like, well, let's do some objective testing around this and see if I'm right. And so I would do the testing and I'd say, okay, we're going to see these genes on your test. Let's get them tested. And so we were doing 23andMe and Ancestry at the time, and then we'd get their genetic results back, and I'd say it was like 95% right. Occasionally, I'd miss one or two genes, but it
Yeah.
was like so right on. The kinesiology told me I'd see that genetic variant there, and there it was. So I started to use that because patients really appreciate that objective feedback. You can be muscle testing and go, yeah, did you feel it? That was stronger. And they're like, yeah, no, didn't feel it. Yeah, okay, but let's go get that tested, and there it was.
Yeah.
So it's a great feedback tool, and it gives patients a lot of confidence that you are on the right track, and that they're very motivated to take their supplements because, holy moly, that gene that you inherited can also lead to Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or cardiovascular disease. So they go, oh, hard to argue. There's my gene, you're giving me nutrients to help with that genetic variant. Yeah, I'm going to take it because I don't want that, you know,
Yes.
that particular disease down the line. It's a warning. And some people are like, well, I don't want to know. I don't want to know what I'm going to die of. Like it's a crystal ball, but it isn't. It's just okay. You
It's
have
just
a
information.
risk. You have a risk
Yeah.
of a certain, issue. It's there. The muscle testing told me it was there, and there it is. They're like, I would like to reduce that risk. And I give them the answer. Here's how you can reduce that risk. That particular enzyme requires this cofactor, which is B1 or
Mhm.
B2 or
Mhm.
pantothenic acid or whatever it is. Its cofactor is going to increase its function so that it protects you from that disease. So they get that and they're like, oh yeah, okay, it makes sense to me. I have that, that chart on my wall, the big, you probably have it as well, the
Yeah.
whole biochemical chart.
Uh-huh.
And I stuck it on my wall and people are like, what's that? And I'm like, well, come here, I'll show you. And it's like, here's how you make your brain chemicals. This is how, this will make you anxious or this will make you depressed. And here's energy production pathway, or here's your detox pathway, or here's the histamine. If you have allergies, you might have genetic variants there. And they're like, whoa, that is so cool. And they get it and they want their genes tested. And so it's, I say, well, we can start with kinesiology and see what the body's showing us and then get your genes tested. And they're like, yeah, I'm in. I mean, 99% of the people I show them to, they go, yeah,
Yeah.
let's do
It's a
that.
beautiful partnership, and that's what's so awesome about the program that you teach is it's a beautiful partnership of, we can get this hard data, but also people, can focus too much on data and miss certain things and they get overwhelmed. So we have the data, we have labs, we have things, we can track these things, but the
Yeah.
kinesiology testing through the biochemical pathways allows us to kind of narrow those things down, also find hidden things. Labs aren't perfect, they miss a lot of things too. And so sometimes we're able through that testing to find like hidden pathogens, hidden toxins, things of that nature that because these pathways have been blocked for so long, aren't going to show in those laboratory tests. So that's the beautiful thing about pairing those things together. And when practitioners can, it doesn't matter what type of practitioner you are, when you can start to partner different facets of like customizing things for people, I think that's where you get,
Yeah.
the best results. And that's kind of what you've created through your systems and through your protocols, which work so well. So something that I've seen just with my practice and with my patients, because we tend to get wide spectrum of things, but specifically I want to touch a little bit on infections for people. So individuals will come in, quite frequently doing a lot of infection protocols or things of that nature. And they always come to like you did with chronic fatigue, like I did with Lyme disease. You come to this halt of, killing, 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 and then the body just gets depleted and you come to this halt and then there's a huge problem. And so can you touch for a minute on so we know that the biochemistry balancing it is obviously important for every single person, but are there some things through, your clinical practice, some things that people maybe hearing this might say, oh man, yeah, I really need to look into that further, as far as maybe some things like conditions that you've seen really amazing breakthroughs through by customizing and opening these, or just really difficult things that people may not know to look into this type of work?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was interesting because one of the first patients, that I was kind of telling you about a little bit was the Lyme disease patient
Mhm.
that I found, and he'd been to 40 different doctors. He was a young kid, and he was in a wheelchair, and he had been diagnosed with reflex sympathetic dystrophy, but he had like just chronic pain. He was in a wheelchair. He could hardly eat anything. He had massive food allergies, and everything he ate kind of made him hurt more and be sick. And so he was down to like rice and chicken that he could eat.
Yeah.
And his parents brought him in. His father is a neuro brain scientist, neuro anyway. He's
Neurology.
real, he's very steeped in allopathic medicine, but they had been to 40 doctors, 40, no exaggeration there. So they brought him in, and I said, well, I did the muscle testing, and I said, it looks like he's Lyme disease, and they said,
Mhm.
well, that's the one thing he's never been tested for. And we just moved here out from outside of Lyme, Connecticut. I said, well, did you ever see like a bullseye rash on his body? And they're like,
Mhm.
yeah, we did. And I was like, well, that's weird that nobody tested him for that. Well, we got to test it, and I put him on a protocol. But to make a long story short, all the food allergies disappeared once we did the nutritional work. We didn't have to fix leaky gut. We didn't have to do the SIBO, the gut work. The food allergies went away. Boom, like that. And I was like, what just happened? I did not expect that to happen because it was just wasn't on my radar. Nobody ever talked about it. It was gone. That was all gone. The pain went away. The Lyme disease went away. I didn't treat the Lyme disease. I treated his body.
Yeah.
I gave his body what it needed to do the right thing to make his immune system more powerful. And it was just
Mm-hmm.
it twisted my brain because I'd been studying functional medicine for so long. So I was like, oh man. So I started it on, again, my patients that had MS and Parkinson's and ALS and Hashimoto's. So the thing that responded the fastest though was the brain chemistry. Like we would put people on the programs and
Mm-hmm.
depression was going away left and right. I mean, people that I didn't even know they were depressed. They'd come back in and say, wow, I feel so
Yeah.
different. I saw angry people become much calmer. I saw anxious people become calmer. Word recall. People that like you can't. What's that word? It's got four legs. It walks
Mm-hmm.
around the house. Oh yeah, dog. Um,
Yeah.
like they would be doing that kind of thing, and they'd come back in going, "Bam, the words are coming." Like, wow, that's so cool. Um,
Mm-hmm.
people definitely people with chronic infections. To me, that's an indicator that their vitamin D receptor actually is not working correctly. So it's
Yep.
going to need some help. And when we fired up, it's like you said, it's here's this infection. Now there's that infection. There's this infection. That's what I was finding in my practice was
Mm-hmm.
chronic infections. Same person, like, oh, now it's a bacteria. Now it's a virus. Now it's it was like
Mm-hmm.
playing whack a mole. Like, okay, we got that one done. We treated her for the bacteria and the candida, and now this virus. There's a virus. And I was doing this. I'm like, why is that happening? Why isn't this person just like staying well? And then when we started looking at a foundational level, way underneath those infections, their body did it. We just gave their body what it needed to do the thing. So again, all
Right.
my chronic, yeah, and it was really cool because my chronic patients, the ones that are like, oh my god, you kind of dread them coming in because it's going to be another thing. They were coming back in going, I'm good. I'm like, what do you mean you're good? You're never good. You always have something going on, whether it's fatigue or pain or can't sleep or whatever. They're going, no, I'm good. Like, what? You have energy? Yeah. You sleeping? Yeah. Any pain? Mm-mm. Digestion good? Yeah.
Yeah.
Headaches? Mm-mm. How's your mood? It's good. Like, yes. Why aren't you jumping up and down? They're going, yeah, no, I've always been good. I'm like, yeah, no, look at your file. I've been treating you for years for all the different things. And now they're good. And so it was stunning. It was stunning to me. So all the things, Rachel, it's like, the infections, the fatigue, those are the biggest thing people would come to us for is pain and fatigue.
Yeah. Totally.
Right.
Mitochondria.
Allergies, sleeping issues, the mood. I just love the mood part of it because I was suffering from depression my entire life. I just vibed with it, and the people are coming back
Totally.
in and happy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why we created My Happy Genes, which is the DNA testing software program that I created because I was like, I want to help more people. We as practitioners can only help one on one, and then as a teacher, I was helping more doctors help people one on one. And then I thought I want to create a software
Mm-hmm.
that'll do the same thing that we do with muscle testing, so I can reach
Mm-hmm.
more people and help more people. And so we started. I got my own DNA test because I didn't like what 23andMe and Ancestry were doing with people's data. They
Yeah.
are selling the data. It's your privacy is not protected there. So I thought I want a private lab. I want one that's not going to share data with anybody. And so we created our own DNA test on My Happy Genes. And then the software program looks at your genetics, looks at the symptoms you're having, and then your biochemistry and triangulates those three things. So we're looking at a software program that can calculate all those things and then design a nutrition and diet program for you. So it's working really, really well. I don't know. Are you using it? Are you using the My Happy
Yeah,
Genes
yeah.
program?
The program
Yeah,
is
yeah,
awesome. It's amazing. I used different ones before my Happy Genes, and the way that you guys have set it up, as well as like the customized reports are so helpful. Because you can
yeah,
have like as a practitioner, you can have the diet conversation with like every person and it gets monotonous and but if you have
yeah,
those real reports and it's not the Bible, but it's saying, "Hey, these are things that actually maybe this is why you don't do so well with those foods, and maybe just try to incorporate that more." Those customized reports are really, really helpful. And I know people really enjoy
yeah.
them. Enjoy looking at them. Yeah.
Cool. They're going to
So,
get better and better. We're going to be designing a specific diet for people. Like it'll come up and say Mediterranean diet is probably your best diet, or keto, or vegetarian, or um, the carnivore diet, which is like a bizarre thing, but for some people it's a
it's
good
a
deal.
new
But
thing.
we'll get more specific. But yeah,
Yeah.
so then you get a supplement protocol. You as a practitioner can take it and make sure that it tests good on patients and tweak it a little bit. And
Mhm. Mhm.
but we tried to get as close to what we do with the muscle testing as possible with a software program. So it's been fun. It's been an
Yeah, it's a
amazing journey.
fabulous person. It's a fabulous program for anyone listening. It's called My Happy Genes, and you can go there and you can run and get the actual genetic data that we're talking about and get customized reports. You can take that just from, the program that they've created, or you can take it and find a practitioner to help you narrow down that information as well. And that's holistic methylation dot is it dot com? Your guys'
My
resource
happy
for someone to find it.
myhappygenes.com.
Well, the My
It's
Happy Genes is the
myhappygenes.com.
genetic. Yeah, that's the genetic platform, but if they want more information to
Yeah.
find, like, a practitioner, that's holistic methylation, right?
Oh, right.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Awesome.
So
Yeah.
yeah, if you're looking for a practitioner in your area, because we wanted people to be under the care of a physician if they're looking at supplements because they're very powerful. When we
Totally.
design a program, it's going to do some things, and if you're already on a medication, it could cause some issues. So we wanted to make sure that practitioner was guiding you with
Mhm.
the right diet and the right supplements, so that there aren't any contraindications there. So it's important that you work with a practitioner to get those things. If you're on, for instance, if you're on a blood thinner and you take supplements that can thin the blood, or block or cause more clotting, then that can cause some problems. So again, we wanted to make sure that you
Yes.
were monitored with supplementation. You can, as a consumer, you can still get the My Happy Genes mood report and the diet report, but the
Mhm.
supplementation we wanted to make sure
Yeah,
they had a
very
practitioner
important.
for.
Very important because people will
Yeah,
just get their genes run and then, like I said, they'll whack a mole and take something for a gene, and then, like we talked about,
right.
it can totally mess you up.
Yeah, it
Uh,
does.
it
I've seen so many other practitioners do that, and it's like, ooh, I cringe. Like, oh, I gave my patient 1,000 milligrams of methylfolate. I'm like, yeah, yeah, just wait a couple weeks, and you're gonna get a phone call because it's not gonna be
Yeah.
good.
Well, that's kind of similar of just
Or they'll,
running. Yeah, that's kind of similar of practitioners just running off one lab report or something, one lab value, and someone may feel better, but
yeah,
then you're opening up something else.
yeah,
And so, all of these things I
exactly.
hope listeners have got through today's program that just flew by, um, is the importance of, knowing that unique chemistry, but also knowing that each one of us is different within even that, and getting more customization if if you need it for your health ailment, for whatever you're struggling with. So um, we're so thankful that you came on today. I know you're a busy woman, and we're thankful and want to honor you for the work that you've done within this field, because I know myself as a story, many practitioners, it's been so vital to creating health and vitality in patients. So we want to honor you for that, and we thank you for coming on today. How can I know you mentioned? Can you just mention again the ways to get that information, and then um, any social media or anything that you have that people can look at some more of your stuff?
Yeah, thank you for that, Rachel. That's very kind. So myhappygenes.com if you want to go and order a DNA kit and start looking at your genetics. We do have a Facebook page and My Happy Genes, and the holistic methylation is with a
Mhm.
WHOLISTIC methylation. I know it's a mouthful, but there's a bunch of information there, and you can watch some of the videos as well of that on YouTube. There's also I have a channel on there, Dr. J Dunn, so you can watch some videos that are really that go into the what the methylation is and the genetics and all of that a little bit more if you're
Mhm.
interested. So you can check that out. Um, yeah,
Awesome.
those are
Yeah, and
good things.
I will link those too when I post this so people can get those links and get them directly. I just wanted you to say it for the audio portion if people aren't looking. Um, so again, we just thank you for your time today. We thank you everyone who listened, and we will catch you guys next time on the Unfiltered Healing Podcast. Take care.